Welcome to Beyond Reality on WOW FM 100.7.
Welcome to another show from right here in St. Mary's, all across the Penrith Valley. You're listening to Beyond Reality on 100.7. Tonight, we're doing something a little bit different again. I got two guests on tonight. First guest will be talking about near-death experience for the first hour, and then we'll be going into some UFO-logy with Bryan Dickeson, and we'll be going over some old ground as well as some news. So sit back, relax, and get ready to take a journey beyond reality. So before we get our first guest on the show, we're going to go over something that we are going to start doing now. It's something at the start of the show that we're going to start doing, a little bit of a snippet, I guess. It's about some weird stories that happen all around the world. And the first one comes down to, it's called the Max Headroom Broadcast Signal Hijack. So this week's Strange But True is what we like to call it, is the Max Headroom Broadcast Signal Hijack. Bit of background information on it. So those born in the 70s or 80s in the, and you know, pop culture buffs might remember Max Headroom. The character was introduced in 1984, year of my birth, and played by Matt Frewer. He was a comedic TV show host pitched as the world's first computer-generated TV host. He did celebrity interviews, hosted a music video show, and even had his own TV series. But we're about to go into one TV appearance he was not scheduled to make on November 22nd, 1987, during an episode of Doctor Who at 11:15 on the dot. The show was interrupted by television static, after which a man wearing a Max Headroom mask appeared. The man screamed, moaned, laughed, and threw out random catchphrases over the course of 90 seconds. He basically just took over the whole broadcast. You know, you can see the broadcast on YouTube if you want to have a look. I'd say it's M-rated and very extremely creepy. I mean, just imagine seeing this pop up on your TV in the middle of the night. Technicians monitoring the transmission attempted to take corrective measures but couldn't stop the intrusion. The channel WTTW got a whole bunch of calls from viewers at home about the hack, and it made national headlines and went down in history as the most well-known broadcast hijacking. The people responsible were never identified, and if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest that you go check it out. Just remember the level of work and expertise that would have gone into hijacking this signal just to air the footage with no clear message. Remember, this is way back when in 1987. It's not like you know, the hackings of today where it's something simple behind the computer. So go check it out. Have a look. It's on YouTube. It is an experience. I've had a look at it myself. We're going to be back with our guest very shortly on near-death experiences. And we have Michael on the line now. Are you there, Michael?
Yes, I'm here, yes.
Fantastic. How are you?
Not too bad. It's not too hot. I live in Brisbane, really, really hot for the last few days, but it's not too bad. So
yeah, so
be with you.
For everyone, right now I think it's 8 o'clock where you are, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah, this stuff's right, yeah.
There you go. So let's start off with what is a near-death experience?
That's a really good question. So originally the term came about by psychiatrists in the 1970s, but the experience itself has been around ever since, you know, human beings have been around, and they also used to be called like revelations, which is more of a probably religious term,
Mm-hmm.
and as the term suggests, near death, it traditionally it was related to people being very, very close to death, for example, in a car accident or because they came to the end of their lives, like through a terminal disease or anything like that. But since then, lots of people have report the same experience while meditating or spontaneously, and not particularly related to an experience close to death. So that's one aspect of it. The other one is there's usually some commonalities in the experience people have.
Yep.
So number one, the senses are usually really quite heightened. So that's sort of in contrast that when people have a dream or they've taken recreational drugs or anything like that, then usually the experience is quite blurry kind of thing.
Yep.
And also not remembered very well, whereas in the near-death experience, people have a very, very clear memory, but also their senses are really quite heightened. They can have an out-of-body experience. So, for example, they're in a hospital and they're looking at themselves undergoing surgery from the ceiling kind of perspective.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, often people travel through a tunnel of light. Often they enter into a whole different realm. They often meet relatives that are already dead, or they meet a being of light. So
what's the most common story that you get in near-death experiences? Is it mainly either seeing a relative and so forth?
Yeah, usually combo of that they go through a tunnel, then meet relatives or a being of light. Often they get to be shown a review of their life. Yep. And also often they have this experience of total oneness with the entire universe and everything that is. An experience that they know everything, so there's nothing to worry about, to question about. And an overwhelming sense, usually people use the word love or something close to that. Yeah.
So how does a near-death experience differ from a dream or a hallucination apart from being close to death when you have one?
Yeah, so an hallucination means that the person knows that what they're experiencing is not real, but rather more imagined, brought about for whatever reason.
Yep.
Whereas in near-death experience, the people feel that whatever they experience is more real than their everyday kind of human reality.
Okay, yeah.
So rather than being something imagined, it's very, very real for them. And it also changes their life forever once they have that, whereas hallucinations wouldn't do that necessarily.
So how many people claim to have near-death experiences that you know of? Like a high number of people? What's the trend?
Yeah, it's a high number of people. They say that the estimate of the world now would be about 350 million people.
Yep.
But in Australia, in the 1980s, they did a telephone survey with people, and about one in 8 or 9 Australians claim to have had a near-death experience then. So it's probably even more now. So in Australia, we're looking at probably 2 million people or thereabouts.
Okay, that's a big number.
Yeah.
So does everyone that's close to death have this experience, or is it just, we're just saying that it is common, but does everyone have it, or just a few select?
Yeah, it's rather not the rules. For example, I work in a hospital in operating room theatres.
Yep.
And probably around maybe 1% of people may have such an experience. So it's rather not the rule than it is the rule, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah.
What's the causes of a near-death experience other than being near-death?
Okay, so yeah, there's a long list of things like drownings and suffocations, even being under general anesthetic.
Okay, yeah.
Often people with with cancers that have not long to live. But like I say, there are a number of people that are just spontaneous or while meditating as well.
Does this prove or at least give credence to life after death, in your opinion?
Yes, and so there is a doctor in the US, and he keeps record of people's testimonies.
Okay,
He has a whole long list of questions that he asked them and all that. And he's just released a book that these experiences are definitely evidence of the afterlife, and that when your body dies, it's not the end of you.
Are you extremely religious yourself?
No.
Not particularly?
No, my parents were not religious or with the church or anything like that.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not as well at the moment, so.
Does religion play a factor in near-death experiences? So people that are, for example, I don't know, Roman Catholic and go to church every week as an example. I'm just pulling an example out here. Are they most likely to have some sort of vision in a near-death experience, or...?
No. What they've tried to research this with the people that have come forward and said, yes, I had this experience, and they can establish no statistical relationship whether people are religious or not, to suggest that it makes any difference whatsoever.
So people that aren't religious, might have visions and see things and not understand exactly what they are, might actually start looking for some kind of information, and that might actually lead them into religion.
Yes, there is quite a number of people who were both an atheist and then had this experience, and then after that actually start going into religion to find some answers for what actually happened during the near-death experience.
Which is a logical approach, so it makes sense. How do people tend to react immediately after having a near-death experience? So when they, regain consciousness and they're fully awake and so forth, and they start remembering what actually happened, what are the immediate things that you see?
So usually there's a great urge for people to tell about their experience.
Very exciting,
Yeah, so like they had this experience, they're so full of it, they want the whole world to know.
Yep.
At the same moment, there's also a real hesitance to do so with the fear of being ridiculed, or even, they would lose their jobs, or their family might think they're absolutely nuts, and this kind of thing. So there's the sort of duality of one sense of you, they would like to share it with the world and tell everyone. At the same time, they're also very, very afraid that this may not be such a wise thing to do. Yeah. And so they really force them to change their entire view of what life is and what happens at the time of physical death and this kind of thing.
So we're talking before about common stories, when the people regain consciousness, and we talked about, a bright light at the end of the tunnel, seeing, past family members, feeling connected to everything, being part of, the universe as a whole sort of thing. Do you have any stories that, come across as sort of a dark side, seeing something that absolutely scared the pants off them, for when they've come back?
Yeah, so there is a minority of people that have really experienced that could be denoted as hellish, or is really dark, like you said. I think it was Gary Packer was a famous one who nearly died, and he was just in a dark and empty space, and there was nothing there. So that made him to be convinced that there is nothing else. There's not even like a judgment, or your morality during life doesn't make a difference. So that's what shaped him to a degree. With these people that have also like experience of they sometimes call hell or a dark experience, they usually start off with that, but then seem to come out of that, and are also then let into the tunnel of light as well.
Okay.
they just kind of see it as a warning of where they don't want to end up, but what is a possibility, I suppose.
Well, so we've discussed, the different visions you have when you were on the other side, and we've discussed just before the break about having some darker visions. Now, my question to Michael is, if you've had those darker visions, do you find the trend is that people start to change and turn their life around or become nicer people, take up religion, charity, etc.?
Yeah, correct. All of the
above?
Yes. Yeah.
And how common is that?
That is the norm. Like, for example, some people get a live review and they're shown that every single thought they ever had is on record.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just a thought, but also the intention of the thought, in particular the effects it has on the other people involved, and they become very quite sensitive to see that every thought has a consequence, and for that reason they become religious to learn more how to be a better person, but also to be in some sense of service. Either some people start a not-for-profit organization or join the religion and become a minister in church and this kind of stuff.
People see what's actually on the other side waiting for them. They don't like it, so they start to clean up their act a little bit, eh?
Yeah.
So, are these experiences dangerous if they are the darker experiences, or does it just scare the living bejesus out of people?
Yeah, they're not dangerous in that anything actually physically threatening happens, but it's more of the sort of what is shown that it makes people change their way of life, so to speak. Yeah.
So what's the ratio of good to bad, Michael, on average, approximately?
I would probably put a number for 98 will be good and 2 would be bad.
Oh, that's encouraging, to say the least.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. So we were talking before about, some experiences where people have actually seen relatives on the other side. Can they, have a conversation with them? Do they actually talk? Can they verify anything that's discussed?
Yeah, so what people usually say that the communication is rather not verbal, but some kind of transference of thoughts.
Okay, yeah.
Without having to actually speak. Then it sort of is a communication of understanding, so they meet either their mum or their dad or their uncle, this kind of stuff.
So more of a feeling rather than speech, as example.
And then also it's sort of quite like a comforting kind of communication.
Okay, yeah.
That they know that they're actually never alone, and all these loved ones are actually always there, this kind of thing.
So, what's the earliest record of a near-death experience that you know of?
Oh, gosh.
That you can just bring up the front of your mind right now.
Yeah.
Put on the spot.
So there is a book called the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Yep.
That's a really ancient work, and they describe this whole near-death experience very clearly in that, and how to be about it, and when it happens to you, and this kind of thing. So maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years ago.
So, if someone has had an experience, a near-death experience, is there anyone they should contact?
It is good to actually talk to someone about it. So if you have a trusted family member or a trusted person, if you're with a church or anything like that, or even your doctor, that's a good place to start.
Yep.
Just depends. Although I said we have probably about 350 million on the planet that had an experience. Not everyone is open to it or knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't know what to do about it. So there's also some international organizations,
Yep.
and on their website you can look up and find out if there's anyone that particularly can help you, or there's groups. So one of them is the IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Experiences.
Yep.
Then also there's the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. I've got a website. It's called nde.net.au. I live in the Brisbane area, so I know one particular person that is trained as a counsellor that can help people with this experience. But I'm sure in the Sydney area there's also people there. I know there's a PhD doctor from a Sydney university that does, Michelle Nard, she's called. She does death cafes where
Okay.
people come together and talk about death and their experiences. So there's just some options there, but I definitely encourage people to have a chat, but be very careful who you choose to not have a negative experience around it.
So earlier you said that a person should talk to their doctor if they have a near-death experience.
Yeah.
How do you find mainstream science treats near-death experiences? Is it something that is treated very seriously and so forth, or?
Well, that is exactly it. It depends probably on the doctor whether they're open to it or not.
Okay, yeah,
But,
this makes sense.
Yeah, but you definitely need support.
Yeah.
Yeah. So naturally, a doctor would be a good place to start, but it just, like I said, depends. So you just need to sort it out a little bit and suss it out. So usually, if you find a group that's gets together on it, then it's a good place to find out, hey, do you know of a doctor that's open to it and that I could possibly go to, this kind of thing.
So near-death experiences, are they caused by false memories, perhaps, or
False memories?
just out of curiosity? Yeah.
So what is a false memory?
So
Something you made up.
something that you haven't actually had yourself. So it could be, for example, a dream or something that you've had in the past. You know how you can remember a dream when you wake up? Could it be caused by something similar to that, or do you have any kind of data or any kind of research that points in that direction, or is everything pointing towards what you've been discussing so far?
Yeah, everything points to what I've been discussing so far. So there's a few elements that it's a very clear and a very clear remembered experience. And it's highly personal and individual. So lots of things will make sense to the experiencer. And whereas if they talk about someone else, you just have to trust them for what they say, but there's no way of telling whether that actually is there or not, if that makes sense.
Have you heard any convincing medical explanations around near-death experiences yet?
No.
Nothing at all?
No, nothing at all.
Sort of points towards the real deal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So what are you hoping to learn from researching near-death experiences?
So can you ask the question again?
What are you hoping to learn from researching near-death experiences? What's your outcome? What are you looking to achieve?
Okay, so number one, to document that the experience is genuine.
Yep.
To get it accepted by the mainstream people that are in health support and mental support and this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And also to have the mainstream open up to people that have these experiences, and that we can actually learn from them, and we can actually benefit from the insights that people get through these experiences. So research is one way of establishing a kind of evidence base where that would help to make this acceptable.
100%.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for me, 100% makes total sense. And that's basically what I thought you'd be set out to achieve. When people do have a near-death experience, is there any kind of time lapse? So, for example, The person's had a near-death experiences, and it didn't feel like a long time. It might have felt like 10 minutes, 30 minutes, and so forth. But when they actually regain consciousness, do they notice that a lot of time's passed, or?
It's rather that in sort of like actual time, it might be a very short period.
Okay,
like
yeah.
Minutes for us, but in the experience itself, they feel like a lot of time may have passed, where they've been shown a lot of things, including live reviews, corners of the universe, and this kind of stuff. So they often also have a sensation of all time going all on at once.
Mm-hmm.
So the experience itself, the progression of time is quite warped and different, and often a lot can happen, but the external observer said, no, mate, that was just like a couple of minutes that you were gone, kind of thing.
So a question from a listener for you. The listener asks, if a person's pronounced dead, so clinically dead, and they do regain consciousness, because there have been some experiences of that, do they tend to have a longer NDE than others?
I wouldn't know if there's any statistically significant relation established there. So what I do know is that some people have been diagnosed as death up to 2 days after that. Suddenly they regained consciousness. So they were kind of already in the morgue, all ready to go into a coffin, kind of thing.
Yep.
And they came back to life. But the length of the near-death experience and that kind of phenomenon, I just no real research being done that shows there's any significance to suggest their experience is longer or shorter.
So talking about now, medically speaking, is it common for coma patients to have near-death experiences?
No. So like I said, there's no real association being established between anything and having a near-death experience. So whether you're in a coma or not, it just doesn't seem to be a factor that causes it or doesn't cause it.
Okay. So then we'll go to other near-death experience cases. So we have visions and so forth. Do people see, religious figures like angels and so forth during these experiences? Yeah,
they do, and then what they see, there seems to be a strong cultural correlation between them. So Christians will see Jesus and angels and this kind of stuff, but if you're a Buddhist, you're more likely to see Buddha.
Okay, yeah. So we were saying before as well, when people have these near-death experiences, that there's the 2% that go through a bit of a judgment in a way. This is your life, this is so forth. Is that only related to Christians as an example, or is that all cultures?
All cultures, yeah.
So
and it is usually in the way of a complete live review.
Okay, yeah.
People get to show things that they wouldn't have remembered elsewise. They were like 7 or 8 and were at school and they did something and were shown the effects that it had on everyone else, and it was not very significant to themselves at the time. But in this moment of the live review, it's shown how important that was, and a good example for them to learn something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've only got a few minutes left. Take us through one of the more wilder near-death experience cases that you've had reported to you.
Wild. Okay.
Yeah, so not common.
So it's not, okay. Oh, not common. Well, there's one experience I can mention that's in the forefront now, and there's a person who wrote, I think, 2 or 3 books, and she also goes around, does talks around the world, so that might be a very interesting one. The person's name is Anita Moorjani.
Yeah.
And she had a cancer, like a blood cancer, leukemia of some sort. Her health started deteriorating a lot. and the chemo wasn't working anymore. The doctor said, "Oh, it's going to be 1 or 2 days. Get your family together, say goodbye, do all that kind of stuff."
Get your affairs in order, sort of thing.
Yeah, and she then was really close to being dead, had the near-death experience, suddenly shifted into a whole different experience of who she is as a eternal being rather than as a person as being human. She then was given the option to either stay there and let her body die or come back.
Yep.
And she said, "Well, why would I come back in a dying body that's free of cancers?" And she was promised, "No, if you come back, you will heal quite rapidly, probably in a matter of days. And you'll be given the opportunity to do all these lovely things still, and also to tell your story and give people your message." So she opted to come back. Was a whole new way of insight of how to conduct her life and stuff. And yeah, she indeed miraculously healed within, I think it was a few weeks of this almost lethal state of cancer. And now has written 2 books, and I think she's on the Facebook and tells her story. And it's quite a really remarkable story. And like the Near Death Experience Research Foundation website has her entire near-death experience recorded. Plus, like I said, they also ask certain questions, similar like the questions you've asked me. Those questions are asked to these people with the experience. And there's an archive, I think, of about 4,000 near-death experiences. So if any of the listeners were interested, I would suggest that they Google up that website and start reading some of these experiences. And hopefully a lot of their questions will be answered like that.
Thank you. So we are now out of time for Michael. However, we will try and get Michael back for a future show if Michael would like to be on, and we can go more in depth about near-death experiences, because it's something that absolutely fascinates me personally. So Michael, before you go, would you like to give out your website or Facebook page or anything like that?
Yeah, so the website's probably the easiest. That's www.nde.net.au, and there's a blog on that as well. And if anyone wants to contact me, then they should be able to find the email address on the website as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, we're back now. So we discussed near-death experiences in the last hour. For this hour, we'll be discussing UFOs with Bryan Dickeson. We had Bryan on the show quite a few weeks ago now. Bryan was one of the first guests we've had on the show. So that's why we've got Bryan on for this hour, just to go over a little bit of information that we touched on before, but also some new information. Bryan's going to be on the show again, I think it's next month. Bryan will be back on for a full 2 hours. So Bryan, a little bit of background on Bryan. His interests in UFOs began in 1954 at the age of 3. Bryan's parents became interested in flying saucers, and they've been part of the Royal New Zealand Air Force during World War II. Bryan began helping his father with the field investigations in early 1959. Bryan's parents run a national UFO investigation group based in Timaru, I think it is, in New Zealand for 28 years, and he helped with their publications and investigations, particularly during the extensive Gisborne UFO flap of 1977 to 1978. And we're proud to have Bryan on the line now. Bryan, are you there?
Hello, Daniel. Yes, I am.
Fantastic, and a lot clearer than last time too, so that's also good.
Yes, we had a few problems, didn't we?
That's right. So, Bryan, just to go over a little bit of old information first that we discussed last time, because we've got a wider listening audience now.
Sure.
Tell us a bit about yourself, a bit about your background, and what you do.
Oh, ouch. Okay, well, I'm presently retired, but previously, with my parents' interest in UFOs and that I've always had an interest in science, and I ended up going to university and doing a science degree in botany and an arts degree in chemistry and English. I sort of became a technical writer and spent many years, as it were, doing documentation of various computer systems and power plants and things like that. So I've also sort of been interested in trying to make UFO material much more accessible to people and much more and look at it much more scientifically in a more structured way. So I've sort of put my science interest into my UFO interest and tried to make it a little bit more, shall we say, more compatible, I think, with many scientific ideas, but that has been quite difficult, of course. I was involved in the 1990s with a group called UFO Research New South Wales in Sydney. I helped to form it, in fact, with a couple of other people, and we were sort of doing some field investigations around Sydney and New South Wales at the time. Got some really good results too. So I've sort of been in and out for a while. The subject for quite a while, I think 63 years, something like that.
So we are talking with someone right now that's had many years of experience in the field of UFOs from a very young age.
Well, I'm sort of reluctant to call myself an expert, because an expert is usually someone who's just read a whole lot of UFO books, but I've done quite a lot of homework on the subject and also done quite a lot of field work on it. So I suppose I can sort of cover it in a fairly wide-ranging way. More recently, for example, I've been involved with hypnotic regressions of people who've been claiming alien abductions and things like that, and that's a very interesting field as well.
So talking about the UFO field, how do you find the UFO field in general?
Oh, wow. It's a very mixed bunch. You get a lot of people who sort of come and go in it for a few years and sort of pass on to something else. They go on to develop another interest, or their life becomes more complicated with family and things like that, so suddenly they're no longer involved. But I suppose over the years, I've found that it's a very mixed bag. There's a lot of people, for example, who still come in who look at it with some kind of a religious fervour, shall we say, and I have a lot of trouble, for example, dealing with with much of the material that comes from the United States. I mean, the American stuff, it's probably about 80 to 90% of the annual output of UFO material in the world, and yet it's probably about 80 to 90% garbage, quite frankly. So it's a lot of regurgitated stuff, but you kind of have this tsunami of swill, as it were, coming from the United States on some really stupid material about UFOs. And I suppose I'm more interested in actually doing field investigations, actually going out, talking to people who had the experiences, finding out what they've seen, and trying to put in some kind of context, which is perhaps a little bit more factually based in recording their material. You quite often find, for example, that the most interesting things when they get to a point when you've been talking to them for a little while, where they say to you, oh, one odd thing I noticed was this or that particular thing happened. And, okay, no, that's actually interesting, because that's something that you don't expect, but they sort of certainly weren't expecting it, but it actually ties in a lot more that other people come forward and tell you about as well. So I'm more on that side, but there's a huge range of people involved in the field, and I guess if you're looking around, and if you're interested in the subject, look around. There are a number of groups available. Most of them have websites. Check them out. See whether they have anything there that you find particularly interesting, and then perhaps talk to them or not. But basically, I mean, it's a question of keeping an open mind, but not necessarily having such an open mind that your brains fall out, I think, really. So you've got to be very careful in the whole field.
So on that topic, you're saying, say, I think it was 92 or 93% of what comes out of the United States is rubbish. How do you separate the fact from the fiction?
Oh, well.
Is there a way?
No, it's very difficult, I have to say, because sometimes, for example, it's some things that come out from America, that's just too strange for words, and next thing, 5 or 6 years later, you actually find yourself, you're actually in a situation where that sort of, you're actually coming into that sort of material yourself, thinking, oh my God, perhaps there's something in it after all. And so you've really got to be a bit careful. So it sort of comes with experience, I suppose. And I mean, I don't claim to know everything about UFOs or anything there is to know about UFOs. It's a huge field, and it's really sort of still only just developing. I mean, it's an area that has not really attracted much scientific interest because it's just been so controversial, and it's been so full of, shall we say, characters, that many scientists want to steer clear, but they will run a mile from it. So it's for me, I see it as an interesting opportunity to actually apply some science and try and apply some sort of reasonable adjudication of what's going on. But at the same time, you have to be aware that there are some pretty interesting people out there who have very definite opinions as well. I'll give you an example. A colleague of mine locally was just saying how a few months ago she was invited, for example, to get involved with an online chat group in the United States, and this is a group of people who believe that they're in fact reincarnated aliens from the Roswell crash. That the craft that crashed at Roswell in 1947, where the aliens died, have sort of since been reincarnated here on Earth as people to help the rest of us human beings. Now, at the same time, there's while my friend was involved with talking to one particular group, there are in fact half a dozen or so of these groups in the United States. And she sort of said to them at one time, well, there's another group in Tucson. How come you're the real group and they're not? So, and they just said, well, we don't talk to that Tucson trailer trash sort of thing. So it becomes very highly political, very sort of, a bit weird as well. So you've got to be a bit careful about that sort of stuff. Go with what you know, I guess, and just try and develop a little bit further. Think, hey, there are a few interesting possibilities here that you need to look at.
Because of that sort of, sort of thing, I'll say, the field doesn't do itself any favours in a way, does it?
No, it really doesn't, and it does not. And that's one of the huge problems you have. I think that most people don't object to the idea of UFOs in themselves, but what they really object to, I think, is the ufologists, because it seems to attract such an interesting group of people, shall we say. So it's the ufologists that really have the bad press, not necessarily the UFOs.
We'll say an eclectic group of people.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. I mean, I'm still amazed, for example, that occasionally I'm talking to people here in Australia and they're saying, oh, do we see UFOs in Australia? And I say, well, yes, you do. And in fact, the first group was formed in America in 1947, APRO with Coral and Jim Lorenzen, but the second group was formed in Australia in Bankstown in 1952.
There you go.
And that came as a response to the UFOs that were sighted over Washington, D.C. on the two weekends back in 1952. And strangely enough, about 3 months after that, the third group in the world was actually formed in New Zealand, in Auckland, by a gentleman called Harold Fulton. So, there's been a huge interest in this part of the world and the subject for quite a long time. But at present, it gets a bit swamped by the sort of stuff that's coming out of America. And people don't always appreciate that there is a culture here, as it were, a UFO culture in this part of the country, this part of the world, I should say.
So, before we get into some of your cases that you've sent through, what's your favourite, or what's the one that comes to mind for you?
Actually, I really have two. There's one I have from New Zealand, up at Gisborne, but there's also a very favourite one of mine too here in Australia that happened at Quirindi in the mid-1990s, and we were able to investigate that and talk to the people involved on a couple of occasions, and it's a really interesting one because it mentions some unusual effects. Basically, the Quirindi case, you had some people sort of having lunch. At the end of their lunch, they were sort of settling back. One of them looking up at the sky while the other person was sort of clearing the table, sort of said, oh my God, that's travelling bloody fast. And of course, he's watching these silver globes travelling across the sky. And then later on, there were a large number, up to about 20 of them at one time. They watched them for a couple of hours. And one time, these two even larger objects appeared, but they looked a bit like a dumbbell. They were sort of like two spheres joined by a bar, and this dumbbell shape. Mm-hmm. These two dumbbell shapes appeared in the sky, and these objects were sort of flying around, put on quite a display. Usually, if anyone sees anything more than about 30 seconds, then the chances are it could be a UFO. This was a daylight sighting too, so it's a rather important one. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing was that the woman described a couple of interesting effects. She mentioned, for example, that first of all, she was able to look at the sky, and she was looking at the sky and watching these objects. She said, I realized at one time I was actually looking into the sun, but I wasn't being blinded by the sun. I thought, oh, okay, that's kind of intriguing. She said, normally I can't look anywhere near the sun, it just blinds me. But she said, I was actually looking right at the sun. I could actually see the sun, etc., going on behind all this. And she also there was an unusual pattern in the sky, sort of a bit like a lacy pattern. And I suddenly thought, oh my goodness, we have some cases of this that go back quite a long period, centuries ago, where people report seeing these objects with these sort of patterns in the sky around them. And these patterns they seem to be something we call a moire pattern. which is possibly a mathematical thing created by these objects in the sky. Now, one other thing they were describing as well was on several occasions some of these objects actually flew through one another. So these objects were approaching at a great speed, didn't stop, but just crashed right through and came out the other side. Hey, still two silver spheres. This is, in fact, a phenomenon, too, that occurs with a few subatomic particles, on very rare occasions. And it's quite a tricky thing to do. It doesn't happen on the large scale. These objects were quite large. These were very large spheres. So you suddenly start looking at these things, okay, you've got this Moire pattern, you've got these objects flying to one another, sort of what is really a quantum effect that's being displayed, and also from being able to look at the sun, which is intriguing because, as I said, we have a lot of these cases that go right back to the Middle Ages, where people report seeing objects in the sky and seeing these patterns and seeing things like that happening. And there's actually a case, too, a similar phenomenon reported in a place right now called Medjugorje near Albania, which is sort of one of these special sites where people see apparitions of the BVM, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and there's certainly these phenomena that are reported there are actually the same sort of thing that was being reported by this couple, but sort of in a these three or four people in a non-secular, in a very secular fashion.
Yep.
Here in Australia, they weren't attributing to some miracle of the Blessed Virgin Mary, but they were describing a very physical phenomenon, and these craft moving in the sky. So you start thinking, oh my goodness, this is possible here that you've got something that's going on in Europe right now, that these objects are also emulating it over here. Are the two perhaps related? You start then to get a bit worried because, of course, you start dealing with religious subjects, and people get very, very touchy about that.
Yeah, when the two subjects tend to come together, you get very.
Yes, and the problems in the States at present, because one of the big problems here in the States at present, because America is very much a Christian democracy, as it were, and Christianity is very big over there, that they still tend to see UFOs as being good or bad things, and in terms of angels or devils, and many people have there's a tradition in America that UFOs are sort of like the angels of the Lord coming back to claim the earth as part of the second coming and things like that. So it becomes, and I'm saying, well, look, it's probably not that at all. It could be just an evolutionary thing. Okay, we're now at a stage where we're going into space, looking at these phenomena, and seeing space-type phenomena that we'll probably be able to do ourselves in a few hundred years' time or before. So, we perhaps should be looking at this in a more scientific and objective way, and get away from that idea of thinking of, just the good and bad Christians and God and angels and devils and things like that. So there's a way of looking at this, I think, that it's probably going to be more productive. It's quite difficult to get many Americans past this idea, yet at the same time we can have these phenomena being reported in a secular way, as it were, in parts of the world like Australia, without those sorts of religious connotations.
For sure. So just to rehash a little bit, Bryan, for those of us that didn't catch the show last time when you were on, are there any areas that seem to be UFO hotspots?
Oh boy, yeah, they do. It seems there are a few places, I think, like northern New South Wales near the Queensland border, sort of actually the Queensland-New South Wales border. Some areas around there are pretty common. We get quite often we get these we'll get UFO flaps, which is large numbers of craft being seen over places like the central coast of New South Wales, just north of Sydney here, around Gosford and things like that. There are a number of places that are fairly frequently reported that there's a lot of stuff we don't actually get to hear about as well. We sort of hear about it much later from people, and they sort of say, when I was in this particular area, I saw these things, and I think, well, perhaps it is a hotspot. We don't really know, because it's often quite hard to get the dates and times for these things from people when they're reporting many, many years later. But there's certainly some hotspots, I think, that I know of in New Zealand. I think Gisborne is certainly one. There's places north of Auckland City itself. It's called Dome Valley, near the Warkworth satellite dish area, and there's a few places like that. There's a couple in the South Island I know of as well. But in Australia there are some, but they're a little less defined because you don't always get to hear about them until much later. We think they're hotspots. We're not quite sure.
So I'm going to hit you with a bit of a zinger, Brian, like I did last time. Same question. If you had to present a case to the people of Australia, the Australian government, and everyone else that UFOs exist, how would you go about presenting that case, and what evidence would you use?
Well, okay, I suppose all I could really do is point to the amount of material that we've already accumulated over the last 60 or 70 years.
Yep.
I've been developing a couple of databases over the last few years. I'm working on an Australian one now, but when you start looking at this material, there's a lot of stuff from people like airline pilots, from military personnel, from people who are trained observers. And there's a certain commonality about it. And in fact, I was showing someone my database just a couple of weeks ago, and he sort of said, you know, he was actually someone who's trained as a reporter, and he sort of said there's quite an astonishing amount of material. He said it's, what you've really got is a phenomenon that's hidden in plain sight. That we have to keep on reminding people that there's this material out there. As I say, many people still come up to me and say that, you know, are UFOs seen in Australia? When in fact there is a huge amount of material about it out there. I suppose just all we can do really is make that information available to people and say, look, we've got this material, we think it's important, we should be investigating it. The other thing is, too, that's happened in the last few years, we find is that the material is actually starting to attract a certain amount of attention from various overseas interests who are actually prepared to pay money for it. We had a case, for example, in New Zealand a few years ago where a gentleman came across, he'd actually been part of the Kaikoura sightings, and he came across an old camera reel which actually had some material from the original Kaikoura sightings that people had forgotten about. Mm-hmm. He was talking about it to some people in New Zealand that had found this, and he could send them a copy. In the meantime, he also told a few of his friends, and suddenly he sort of said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I can't tell you the material that I've actually sold to someone else in Germany." And we do get this, that people are starting to buy up this information with a view to mining it for interesting material that they can actually use possibly in back engineering or looking at some of these phenomena. There was a case just in the United States a few years ago where a certain gentleman paid over $500,000 for access to the MUFON files. And basically he's actually known this year he was, in 2016 he actually put up a experimental satellite for the Americans. He has a corporation over there in aerospace industries. He's getting involved in that. And he actually sort of put up something on the space station, which was a new kind of satellite pod, shall we say. It's basically, when you have like a metal box flying around the Earth, it gets hit by small meteorites, and over a period of time it does in fact start to develop holes, or can develop holes and be quite dangerous. And this guy basically sort of came up with a theory of a plan of actually making it out of a woven sort of Kevlar, shall we, type material that's used sort of in bulletproof jackets. And he's put 2 or 3 layers of this Kevlar material, and in actual fact it sort of stops it stops micrometeorites, it stops your craft from being punctured, and maintains the integrity of it. And it's showing some very, very, very profitable, very, very, very good qualities that they wanted to use in space stations in future. And he's the gentleman who actually got involved a couple of years ago with actually buying this material from MUFON. He's also approached a gentleman here in Australia trying to buy his videos on UFOs. So there's a commercial quality about this that is developing. But some people are looking at this much more seriously as a commercial interest, and we find that this is something that's actually been going on for a while. The Japanese have an interest. We know the Germans have an interest in it. We're not hearing much at all from the Russians, but we know that the Americans also develop interest as well. And I think in future you're going to find this information will actually people will actually be looking at this information and mining it more for the phenomena that are being reported, and perhaps using it in our own sort of space programs. So, it's perhaps something, if I was going to say this to Australia, I would say, look, okay, you guys, we've got this wonderful wealth of material here. It's developing a commercial interest because of these people, in the United States, etc., who are looking at it. And basically, perhaps you should get involved in that as well. We should start looking at developing an Australian space industry, looking at some of these unusual effects, and seeing if there's something that we can get from that we can produce in our own sort of space program.
All right. Last week we had something a little bit special on the show relating to something we were discussing just now. So you were talking about credible witnesses, airline pilots, police officers, etc. Last week on the show, I had the recording of the Trumbull County UFO dispatch. So we had the recordings of the police dispatch. We had people calling in that were seeing the craft. We had the police officers coming back saying, this is what we're actually seeing now. We had the dispatch officer call, the local airport, trying to use their radar to see what's actually there. Have you heard of the case itself?
No, I'm afraid I hadn't heard of that one in particular.
Okay. Well, I think it's about an hour or so of audio it's just straight police dispatch. So it might be worth having a bit of a listen to.
Sure.
Do you personally believe UFOs are of extraterrestrial origin or of something else?
I think they are, yes, because, as I said, I've been going through a lot of old material recently, and it was quite common back, say, 50 years ago for a lot of sort of UFO investigators to look at one another and sort of say, nudge, nudge, look, we think that's actually one of our sort of secret developments, one of our secret aerospace developments. And I can assure you that looking at them after 50 years, they're still, the technology has not emerged anything like that. So it's still non-terrestrial technology. So you're looking at something that we don't have, so it must come from somewhere else. We were very lucky, for example, too, as far as the police are concerned. The police are usually very good, in fact. And in the early 1990s, there's a bit of a flap up at Gosford on the Central Coast, and the police there were very, very cooperative. I think after a while they got a bit annoyed with public showing so much interest and taking up a lot of their time, but they were actually very, very helpful, and they sort of provided us with material and provided us, put us onto people who could help us. So, usually you find that if the police or public officials aren't, if the job's not being interfered with too much, they will usually help you. They're usually pretty cooperative. Their attitude is pretty well, neutral. Hey, look, we've got our guys out there that are seeing this stuff too. Hey, we don't know what the heck it is. These guys don't particularly necessarily know what it is either, but, there's no reason why we shouldn't at least share the information. So the police in Australia are pretty good about that. That's
good to hear. We've got a question from a listener, so it relates back to when we're talking about hotspots. So is there more of sightings or of UFOs and so forth in the countryside as opposed to the city?
Yes, there do tend to be more in the countryside, but that's possibly because people in the city are, used to seeing things flying over pretty much, any time of night, and so people sort of take it for granted. So if a UFO sort of comes across, people think, it's just a police helicopter or something like that.
Yeah.
But in the country where people they usually know the stars pretty well, they know the flight paths pretty well. If something comes into that that's not quite the usual sort of aeroplane or something like that, or they then notice it does unusual stuff, they notice it very much indeed. And we had a case just about 6 or 9 months ago in southern Queensland, where there was a group of farmers had been sort of talking to one another about, in a particular area they were talking about these unusual lights. They were watching on each other's property, and they were sort of cross-checking it and things like that. And so, yes, yes, there are hotspots, but they too tend, the countryside is certainly a better place to see them because, say, the city lights tend to be a bit of a distraction. What's going on in the city tends to be a bit of a distraction.
I'll second that. And another thing that could relate to that as well, I have a telescope, and when I'm in the country looking through the telescope, I get a nice, clear night. I can see quite a lot more. When you're closer to the city, you get the glare from the lights bouncing off the atmosphere, and you can't see half as much. So when you hit the country...
You also get a layer of mist. You often get a layer of mist that's up there that you're not really aware of until at night. When suddenly you think, hey, out in the country I can see thousands of stars. In the city I can only see half a dozen.
And you see so many more things. You see a lot more shooting stars and so forth. So, someone from the city that's gone to the country will be thinking, hey, hang on a minute, that's not normal. I don't normally see that. Boom, UFO. So, that's a normal misconception.
Well, it can be. It's not as common as you would think, because most people are pretty cluey. I mean, the public's reasonably well educated, and they think, okay, it's going to be a star or something like that. If they're looking at something that's really unusual and they contact us, they're often a bit freaked out by it because they know the sky enough, and I've seen enough of the country sky, for example, to know what's up there. And if something weird comes along, something really big comes along, as occasionally does happen, they're really quite freaked out about it. Like, no, this is definitely not a star, this is not a meteorite, this is not this or that. So people are pretty well up on that sort of thing nowadays.
That's pretty
give
good.
us credit for something.
So back to the whole 92% fiction and 8% fact. Have you seen any, popular footage of a UFO or extraterrestrial that you would feel would be the real deal?
Okay.
Interesting.
I'm just trying to think.
Hard, but,
There was a case actually over Western Sydney a couple of years ago. It was in daylight saving. I think it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I initially thought, it was the same day that, in fact, the police in Sydney had organised a raid on several potential terrorist places in Western Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time as that was occurring, there was, in fact, this large, it was probably about 2.5 metres, sort of a flattened sphere, an oblate spheroid, that's the technical term for them. It was white, it had fuzzy edges, bright white, giving off a nice white light. And I initially thought, that's probably the new police little sky camera they've got, a special drone that they were just buying.
Yep.
And I thought, okay, so it's probably just that. But then I got other reports coming and thought, just a moment, that can't be it, because it was so close, only about 200 or 300 feet above the ground. It was, you would have, at that height, you would have heard a noise. Drones do make a certain amount of noise. There was no noise associated with this. It did not have sort of nice, well-defined edges, as you would expect with a drone. They were fuzzy. It was completely silent. And there were several videos that came out of it. There were things that people had taken with their mobile phones. And I thought, from the height of it, from those different videos, you could actually get an idea where it was in the sky. And it was perfectly silent. It was there for about an hour or so. About 2.5 meters across, a flattened sphere, and it could not have been a drone. The then excuse was that, hey, perhaps it's a Google balloon. And I was looking up Google balloons, and in fact, yes, Google balloons do take on a particular shape, but they tend to do that about 12,000 feet up in the sky when they become fully inflated. Mm-hmm. Down that close to the ground, they're sort of like they have a sort of a roundish top and sort of a swirly bottom, because the fabric of them is sort of still quite loose. It hasn't fill up until they get higher up in the sky. So, and also they're huge. This thing's only about, say, 2.5 meters across.
Yep.
Whereas a Google balloon is about 20 or so meters across when it's fully inflated, 12,000 feet up. So it could not be a Google balloon. And a lot of people are saying, it's a Google balloon, but I still think that's a bona fide UFO, and I'm prepared to state that. Certainly very interesting, and that happened in an auspicious time. So I think that's a very good video, a local video of a UFO.
Sounds good. We're going to go to our last break here, Bryan, and we'll get you back on the other side of it. Just remember, ladies and gentlemen, Bryan will be on the show at a later date for the full 2 hours as well. Bryan has a wealth of knowledge. You've sent me quite a bit of documentation, and I'm still going through it. There's that much of it. So, when Bryan does come back, we can go more in depth. This is just a teaser in a way. So, one thing we didn't touch on in the last show was crop circles. So, basically, can you explain what you've uncovered concerning crop circles? The Reader's Digest version, because we have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think some of the very first ones are very interesting, but obviously, I think since then a lot of people have become involved in producing crop circles of their own. There are other reports of other crop circles from other parts of the world, and in actual fact, the very first thing I investigated with my father about age 8 or 9 was a circle of depressed vegetation, a crop of something called Chalmolia in New Zealand, about 30 miles from where I was living at the time. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I just sort of called, saucer nests. So the very simple swirling circle ones seem to be pretty much, they could be sort of landing sites. I've looked at a couple of cases too where they've occurred on things like ponds, dew ponds in the North Island of New Zealand, a place called Pukitutu, where the weed sort of died and sort of part of the weed died and sunk in the water, and the cattle were affected if they drank the water and sort of kept away from the area for quite a while. And I'm also intrigued too by the Tully circles as well in northern Queensland. And we actually had a guy in UFO research in New South Wales who came along about the mid-1990s, a gentleman called Ron Gast. Unfortunately, he died in the middle of last year. But he was actually an independent TV producer for the ABC and the Checkerboard program. And at one time, I think in the late 1960s, they asked him they sent him up to Queensland to do a program on the Tully nests. And he went up there, he sort of spoke to all the farmers, he took some pictures and things like that. He was quite impressed. He sort of came back with his little documentary for Checkerboard, and a couple of days before it was due to be shown, showed it to the ABC management. They were not very happy. Said, we wanted you to produce a humorous take on it. We didn't want a serious production at all. So that particular program had disappeared into the vaults of the ABC. And when Ron came along to us in the mid-1990s, he was sort of rocked up one of me. He said, look, I'm an independent producer. I produced this program on the Tully nests in the 1960s. I said, oh, yes, okay, sure. My name is George Negus, And then I sort of said, no, actually, I do remember that because I'd actually been reviewing some old journals just a few months before that, and I'd come across a reference to it. Ron was a bit annoyed at the time and actually sort of spoke to one of the local newspapers and said that they pulled his program. He thought it was an interesting subject that should be considered, and it had been picked up by a New Zealand UFO magazine and reprinted in that. So the next meeting, I took along a copy of that full page and showed it to Ron. He was quite shocked that someone actually had remembered that it was still around.
Yep.
And he actually gave us a talk later on what had happened about making that particular program. So he was talking about the Tully circles. Now, when the crop circles started to appear in in England, I should say, a couple of people are coming out saying that, was it Bill and Ben, a couple of guys who were making these crop circles, made them all initially, and they got the idea from the Tully nests when they were in Australia. Well, the Tully nests were made over swampy areas. Tully gets a very high rainfall. There's these swamp areas, and these circles were not actually made on crops at all. They're actually made over reeds in circles in these marshes in Queensland. So Bill and Ben Carter made those ones, and then of course it sort of took off in the United Kingdom with crop circles and in Somerset and places like that. And other people then started making crop circles, and they're getting more and more elaborate. There'd be some odd phenomena associated with some of the crop circles, certainly not with others. Some of them do seem to be man-made. I'm pretty convinced of that myself. But there might still be some that are not man-made. And it's so hard, really, to actually sort out those that are real from those that have been faked.
Again, the fact from the fiction, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost worth. It's not worth your while really looking at it too much, because until people actually lose interest and think, okay, we'll stop making our crop circles and we go back to what the original phenomenon was. But there have been reports in Australia of them as well, down in the Murrumbidgee region. We've got a couple from down there.
Yep.
We occasionally get them reported up near northern New South Wales. But here people don't, the distance here in Australia is so vast that people don't go hundreds and hundreds of miles to make crop circles. These seem to be fairly much the genuine thing. And most of the ones that are reported in Australia appear to be fairly simple, just a few simple circles or a few circles and rings and things like that. Nothing like it really complex.
Nothing elaborate.
No, nothing too elaborate. What's the significance of it? I really don't know, because there's so much written about it. It's got like its own little tribe of UFO investors or little investigators that sort of collect these things and produce their publications and stuff like that. Some of the early ones are so very, very interesting. Some of the later ones I had my doubts about, and I'm sort of thinking, there's so much noise has developed with it that you can't really see what the original signal was. If there's anything crop circles originally, it's hard to know what that was now.
Yeah, I've heard many different explanations for crop circles, form of communication, like language and so forth, all through math. I've heard of the crop circle as a two-dimensional image when converted into three-dimensional, it gives you plans to build something or, I've heard many different ways of interpreting crop circles. So,
yes.
Yeah.
There really isn't. I mean, it's got to be such a own little sort of field of interest, shall we say, that it's really hard to know what to make of it. So I've seen, as I say, a landing circle myself many years ago, and I know that they occurred, and we have the examples from Tully, Queensland, which were associated with UFOs as well. And yet, occasionally I think UFOs have been associated with these crop circles in England as well, but or in other parts, in places like Germany, Poland, places like that. But it gets so messy. You get to a point thinking, okay, I could be doing other stuff instead, because other people are having such a wonderful time having a hoot that it's just not worth your time. You're wasting your time on it, I don't think.
Yeah, that's true. Bryan, we've only got a few minutes left. Would you like to give out a web address or Facebook page or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, look, I work with a couple of groups. There's one called UFO Research New South Wales.
Mm-hmm.
They have a website. You can get you just go on, look them up, UFO NSW. You can look at their website and check them out. They're pretty good. I also work with another group called INUFOR, INUFOR, Independent Network of UFO Researchers. That's up here in the Blue Mountains, where I live. I suppose, give people my web address, I suppose, is all lowercase, Bryan Dickeson @gmail.com, BRYAN DICKESON, all lowercase, @gmail.com if people want to contact me. And we can at least talk about what they may have seen or whatever. So, yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all.
Fantastic. So that is basically the show. We're wrapping up. Speaking of UFOR, next week we've got Doug Moffat from the UFOR on the show, and that's going to be it's going to be an eye-opener for a lot of people. So, tune in, get ready, and fantastic. Bryan, you get the honours to say goodnight to Western Sydney.
Okay. Good night, Western Sydney, and happy sighting or viewing or whatever.
There you go. Thank you very much, Bryan. We'll catch you at a later date. And for everyone, that's a good night from us here at Beyond Reality. We'll catch you next week and catch you on the other side.